She was the failed pilot nobody noticed, until the day an F-16 lost all power midair and called her name. Harper Lane, once rejected for being too analytical, became the only voice that could guide the jet home, without ever leaving the ground. What followed wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning that shook the Air Force to its core. Welcome to my channel. You ever have a dream yanked from your hands by people who never really looked you in the eye? That was me, 3 years ago, standing outside Hangar 3 at Polaris Air Station, Montana, with nothing but an envelope and the kind of silence that rings louder than any engine. Name's Harper Lane. Used to be Cadet Lane, if anyone remembers. I was 27, summa cum laude in aerospace engineering, top 5 percentile in flight aptitude, physically maxed out on every eval. And yet, there I was, holding a letter that might as well have said you're not the type we trust to pull the trigger. That was the crux of it. One panelist, stiff as an ironing board, told me flat out, "You don't strike me as someone who can handle the moral burden of weapons-grade decision-making." I'd passed every simulation, every stress test, and yet, one psych interview, one cold line of text, no appeal, no second shot. They told me I was better suited for technical support, maintenance work, logistics. Essential, reliable, and respected, the rejection read. Respectable words from people who had just slammed the cockpit door in my face. It felt like a death, not of me, but of a version of myself I'd been building since I was 10, sitting on my dad's shoulders at the Johnson Air Show, tracing fighter jets as they ripped through the sky like thunder incarnate. My father flew Hornets, served 2 tours over Kandahar. He'd come back quiet, but solid. Never talked about kills, only landings. "It's not about glory," he used to say. "It's about bringing the damn thing home." Well, I never got to try, but I stayed. They stuck me on the ground crew. I serviced the very jets I'd once trained to fly. Every rivet I tightened, every diagnostic I ran, reminded me that someone else got my seat. Someone who'd passed a test I never got to retake. The other techs didn't talk much, but over time, they saw I wasn't just another paper-qualified dropout. I could diagnose engine drag by ear. I rebalanced a fly-by-wire loop once without a scope, just my gut and the old-school method Dad taught me with a tuning fork and a wrench. The pilots, though? I was wallpaper, a shadow with a toolbox. They talked ops around me like I was deaf, debriefed 6 feet away like I didn't exist. But I kept showing up. First one in, last one out. Learned every aircraft system like it was an extension of my own body. Not because I wanted a medal, because the people climbing into those jets deserved the best odds possible, even if I wasn't one of them. My father died in a training crash the year before I entered flight school. His last words to me, written in a birthday card I still keep, were, "Service is doing the right thing even when nobody's watching." I didn't understand that line until they shoved me into the shadows. And I stayed there, not out of fear, out of resolve. At Polaris, rank ruled everything. Pilots sat at the top, clean suits and cooler nicknames. Maintenance was bottom tier. We were the ones holding the line below the spotlight. But let me tell you something. Shrines don't last unless someone polishes the floor. For 3 years, I kept the birds flying. F-16s, A-10s, even the occasional stealth bird when brass felt generous. And every day I watched them take off through the glass in Hangar 2, the sky split open in a scream of power I used to think would be mine. And here's the kicker. I didn't even resent them anymore. I was proud, because while I couldn't fly them, I made damn sure they came back in one piece. My name wasn't on any mission brief, but my hands were on every wing that came back smoking but intact. My fingerprints were on every safe landing. You might not find me in the press kits or pilot bars, but I was there, behind the torque wrench, under the fuselage, checking one more seal before a sortie. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the system that dismissed me was about to stumble headfirst into a problem it couldn't solve without the very skills it once rejected. It started with a glitch. A twitchy warning light in Falcon 07, one of our training F-16s. Just a low-level amber during pre-flight checks. The kind of thing pilots learn to ignore. Except Rivera, Lieutenant Nathan Rivera, he didn't. He trusted his gut. So did I. I saw it first, 15 minutes into the diagnostics. An irregular pattern in the alert loop. Not constant, not spiking, just off. Like a rhythm that doesn't match the song. And it wasn't in the logs. No manual entry. Nothing. but saying anything meant stepping over the line. Ground crew doesn't make calls. Failed pilot sure as hell doesn't. Sergeant Weller, the senior tech on duty, called it clean. Said it was a sensor burp. Rivera hesitated. Said it still felt wrong. The crew around him looked ready to move on. That's when I made a decision I hadn't made in years. I scribbled a note. Folded it twice. Slipped it into Rivera's hand as I passed. Check NAV sync against radar interference. Possible misalign under dynamic G. Confirm? He read it. Twice. His eyes sharpened like someone had just thrown ice water in his face. Then he called for a full secondary diagnostic on positioning systems. No one questioned him. Pilots don't need to explain their instincts. Turns out, the auxiliary radar system running on the base that morning, an older model with a bad grounding protocol, was interfering with F-17's position sensors. At low altitude, no problem. At Mach 1, 3 in a dive, total failure. That note might have saved his life. Might have saved a dozen more down the line. And when they asked how he knew, he didn't say. Just nodded toward the tech crew. Weller figured it out, though. Saw the note. Saw me hand it off. He didn't say much, just looked at me longer than usual. That afternoon, I went back to cataloging parts and recalibrating avionics. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. That night, word started to trickle through the base. And somewhere in a secure office, a young officer named Captain Emery Dalton opened my personnel file, and his jaw hit the floor. Captain Emery Dalton was one of those new breed officers, too young to be jaded, too smart to toe every line. He came in 6 months ago to oversee training protocols, and frankly, most of us figured he'd do what all the rest did: inspect, report, disappear. Except Dalton didn't vanish. He paid attention. He watched people work. And after that radar interference close call with Falcon 07, he started digging. I found out later he pulled my records himself. Not just the usual qualifications folder. He requested my full evaluation history from the flight academy. Every psych note. Every aptitude score. He didn't say anything. He just started showing up near the hangar more often. Watching. Asking quiet questions. I was elbow deep in an avionics panel on an A-10 when he finally approached. Lane, right? He asked, tugging off his gloves. I didn't bother looking up. That's what the patch says. You rewired the emergency circuit on F-07, didn't you? I paused. Eyes still on the wiring loom. You read the report. Fault was in the external radar field. He smirked. You slipped Rivera that note. I stood up slowly, brushing grease off my hands onto the rag in my back pocket. If I had, it would have been off record. And unofficial help doesn't come with paperwork. Dalton stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know, your pilot evaluation flagged a single concern. Emotional detachment in weapons scenarios. Nothing else. Your scores, flight, fitness, comprehension, were all top tier. Higher than mine, probably. So why didn't you fight it? File a challenge? I met his eyes. Because you can't arm wrestle a system that already wrote you off. And because some of us learn to prove ourselves where no one's looking. He nodded once, like something clicked. Mind if I stick around next time you're tuning avionics? Might learn something. I shrugged. If you can tell the difference between a faulty capacitance relay and a dirty pin connector by smell, you're welcome. He laughed, really laughed, and that's when I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition. Not the empty kind, the thanks for your service type, but the kind that says I see what they missed. That night, I found a folded note tucked into my locker. Your silence kept jets in the sky. Let's make sure it doesn't keep you on the ground forever. Dalton. I didn't know what that meant yet, but something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, someone with rank saw more in me than a uniform patch and a missed opportunity. But the air around Polaris was changing. 3 days later, it happened. Drill day. 6 F-16s, including Falcon 07, were scheduled for a high-altitude formation run over the eastern ridge. It was clear blue sky, no wind, no pressure systems. Textbook flying. I was assigned final pre-flight on F-07, standard procedures. I ran diagnostics. Clean. I double-checked the electrical grid. No flickers. Even did a thermal scan on the junction block Rivera had flagged once during a rough climb last fall. Everything passed. So why did my stomach knot the second the jet taxied? I stood in the tower with the crew chief as the squadron lifted, watching them peel into the air like sharpened blades. I counted every heartbeat between their callouts. Rivera's voice was crisp, controlled. just like always. Until it wasn't. This is F-07. I'm showing full electrical failure. Confirming total blackout. No stabilizers. No comms except battery backup. The tower went still. Everyone froze. Eyes locked on the console as Rivera's blip began to drift erratically. Emergency protocols launched. Backup frequencies opened. Crisis teams mobilized. The jet was dead in the air. No flight control. No navigation. Nothing. A supersonic rock with wings. All our manuals were useless. Every trained response ended in crash simulations. The tech teams started reading out checklists, but nothing applied to a triple system failure. And then, clear as a bell across the fallback emergency frequency, we heard it. If anyone hears this, I need Harper Lane. You could have heard a bolt drop in that room. Dalton turned to me, his face pale. That's you. I know. I didn't ask for permission. I ran. Down the tower steps, across the tarmac, straight to the comms desk. I grabbed the mic. The ops lead started to protest, but Dalton cut him off with one word. Let her. I keyed the mic. F-07, this is Lane. I'm here. The sigh of relief in Rivera's voice almost cracked. Lane, thank God. I need your patchwork. Emergency workaround. Nothing's responding. 8 months ago, I'd rebuilt F-07's backup systems from scratch after a hydraulic short fried half the primary board. The official report listed temporary modifications. In truth, I'd spent 16 hours rewiring her guts by flashlight. I hadn't logged it because I wasn't supposed to. Only Rivera knew. Because he'd flown the test circuit after I finished. That day, I gave that jet a heartbeat that didn't exist in the handbook. And now, it was the only thing keeping him alive. Okay, Rivera, I said, breathing slow to keep my voice even. We're gonna walk this bird home. You still got emergency battery power? Barely, he replied tight. I'm watching it drain. Copy that. Switch to auxiliary bus line Bravo. Should redirect juice from backup capacitors to your primary flight panel. Silence, then, got it. Basic HUD's back. Good. That meant the bypass I'd wired through the right side manifold still held. Now look under your throttle. You'll see a small panel marked Service Bay 4B. I see it. Pop it open. Inside is a red toggle, left of the maintenance chip. Flip that. It'll reroute stabilizer control through the redundant servo. Unofficial, but tested. Done. I've got partial rudder response. Then we can fly. In the tower, the room had gone so quiet I could hear people breathing. Every eye was on me, every radio tech frozen mid-keystroke. I didn't care. I could hear the engine through Rivera's headset feed, overloaded, whining just shy of a flameout. I pictured every wire I'd soldered, every bolt I'd tightened, every guess I'd made that day 8 months ago when no one else wanted to touch F-07. Rivera was flying an unbalanced machine built on gut instinct and sleepless precision. Lane, Rivera said, you got me this far. Can you get me down? I'm not going to let you fall, Nate, I said softly. We're doing this. I rattled off angles, throttle thresholds, airspeed tolerances, all based on a system no manual had ever logged. My system, my math, my gamble. Coming low. Throttle to 60. You're flying blind, so trust my voice. Copy. He didn't question. Not once. On the runway, crash foam crews scrambled into position. Fire suppression rolled in. The base commander himself had arrived at the tower, face tight as wire. They'd all heard it by now. The woman they'd rejected as unfit to fly was now guiding a jet down by memory. Throttle steady. Nose up 2 degrees. Hold her level. Watch your trim. It's gonna fight you. Fighting me already. That's 'cause you've got a stubborn girl under you, I said, almost smiling. She likes things her way. We passed under 2,000 feet. Sweat beaded down my neck, but I kept my hand steady on the console mic. You're cleared for runway 4. You've got 600 yards of foam. Don't aim for beauty, aim for home. Copy. You still with me, Lane? I'm right here. Through binoculars, we spotted F-07. Her glide slope was steep, shallow correction impossible. I made a call. Cut throttle at 300. Let drag stabilize your descent. You'll come in hot. Brake with everything you've got. Understood. The landing came like a thunderclap. F-07 screamed over the perimeter fence, dipped hard, bounced once, twice, then skid-slid down the runway in a trail of smoke and metal sparks, her nose well locked at a harsh angle. Every crew member on the line held their breath. Then, silence. Then, tower. Rivera's voice came in, strained but alive. F-07 down. Pilot intact. Thank you, Harper Lane. That last line, it didn't go through secure comms. He said it on the open band. On purpose. Everyone heard it. I didn't move. Couldn't. My heart was slamming so hard I thought it had burst out of my chest. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. Captain Dalton came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder. That was the finest piece of aviation control I've ever seen. I didn't fly it. You didn't have to, he said. You built the damn wings midair. Within 2 hours, the story had spread through every hall and hangar. I was no longer the quiet tech with a failed pilot file. I was the woman who landed a dead jet from the ground. And that changed everything. They say news flies faster than jets on a base, and that day proved it. By sundown, every mechanic, officer, and pilot at Polaris knew what had happened. And not just what I did, but what I'd once been denied. I stayed late that night, like always. Cleaned my bay, checked inventory. Nobody asked me to, but that's who I am. I'd rather work in silence than soak in attention. Except I wasn't alone this time. Dalton walked in, holding a thick manila folder. The kind of folder with classified stamps and half the pages redacted. He set it gently on my workbench. What's this? I asked, wiping oil from my fingers. Your old file, he said. The full one. Not the paper-thin version Command keeps for technicians. I pulled the original Flight Academy records. I didn't say anything, just stared at it. Do you know, he continued, you placed third nationwide on the Pilot Aptitude Index the year you applied? I remember, I said. Didn't help much. It should have. He opened the folder to a printed report, Psych Eval. Highlighted in yellow was the line that had sealed my fate. Subject demonstrates high cognitive and mechanical performance. Potential concern noted, exhibits analytical detachment in simulated combat scenarios. Recommend reassignment to non-flight role. Dalton shook his head. You were disqualified by one paragraph. No hearing. No review. And get this, 3 years later, that same evaluator revised their criteria, called it too rigid for unconventional aptitude. You were never told. I didn't speak for a long time. Then I said, it wouldn't have changed anything. Not back then. Dalton looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. You didn't just accept it. You lived it. You turned rejection into the most consistent safety record on base. I figured if they wouldn't let me fly, I'd make damn sure the people who did had machines that wouldn't fail them. You did more than that, he said. Rivera trusted your word over every checklist in the Air Force. You saved his life because you knew that jet better than any blueprint ever could. I looked down at my hands, scratched, calloused, steady. He reached into the folder again and handed me something folded and crisp. What's this? A reinstatement form. Command reopened your pilot file. Officer track, flight path, everything. They're offering it to you. I didn't take it. Not right away. I stared at it for what felt like forever, the same way you might stare at a map to a road you thought was buried long ago. You going to sign it? Dalton asked gently. I set the paper down beside my wrench. No, I said. He blinked. No. I don't want to go back to chasing the seat I was denied. I want to make sure no one else with hands like mine ever gets written off again. Dalton said nothing for a long while. Then he nodded slowly. That's what makes you different. What does? You're not chasing flight anymore. You're building the runway. And that's when the idea struck me. Not to reclaim my dream, but to redirect it. If the system couldn't see past its own blind spots, maybe it was time someone taught it how. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from adrenaline, though I'd had my fair share, but because something had taken root in my chest. An idea. It pulsed like a heartbeat. I spread out a legal pad on my tiny kitchen table. No fancy software, just a pen and coffee and my thoughts. I wrote the title in block letters across the top. Phoenix Program. For those who were told no, the premise was simple. There were more people like me out there, talented, capable, overlooked. People the system saw as misfits, or worse, invisible. Some were rejected pilot candidates. Others were mechanics, radar techs, logistics minds, who'd never get a badge or a salute, but who kept the whole damn machine running. I didn't want to build a new flight school. I wanted to build a new kind of pipeline, one that didn't throw people away just because they didn't fit a checklist. Phoenix would pair these non-standard candidates with mentors, veterans who'd walked similar paths. It would offer second looks, not second chances. Because talent doesn't vanish when someone fails one test. Sometimes it just shifts lanes. I brought the idea to Dalton the next morning. He didn't blink. "Let's do it," he said. 2 weeks later, we presented it to Colonel Wynne, base commander. He was old-school brass. Square jaw, polished shoes, the kind of guy who could recite regulation numbers from memory. I expected pushback, maybe even a laugh. Instead, he listened all the way through. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Harper, this is the smartest damn thing I've seen come out of Polaris since I got assigned here." Approved. That was it. In 3 months, Phoenix Wings officially launched with 5 mentors and a handful of recruits. We hosted workshops in spare hangars, converted old briefing rooms into labs, even brought in outside engineers from aerospace firms who'd faced similar career detours. At first, some folks on base rolled their eyes. Mentorship for washouts, they called it. But then came the numbers. 2 of our first recruits overhauled the fatigue monitoring system for our older fleet, cutting unscheduled maintenance by 28%. Another created a new AI-assisted sensor check that shaved 5 minutes off every pre-flight sequence. One of the young women who'd washed out of pilot school because of insufficient spatial awareness, she built a cockpit layout redesign that's now being tested for future aircraft models. Suddenly, Phoenix wasn't a side project. It was a movement. And then, one day, I got a knock on my office door. He wore a suit. Civilian, but with the posture of a man who once flew. "Ms. Lane," he said, "I'm Dr. Hayes Webb. You might remember my name." I did. He was the psychologist who'd signed off on my disqualification report. He looked older now, paler around the edges. But his voice carried weight and regret. "I came to apologize. I didn't know what to say. I measured you by a framework that was never designed to see people like you," he said. "I've watched what you've done here. Phoenix Wings, it's brilliant. It's what we should have been doing all along." He pulled a thick folder from his bag. "I've rewritten the evaluation protocols. With your permission, I'd like to submit them to the board under your program's banner." I took the folder. He hesitated. "I failed you once. But if you'll have me, I'd like to help make sure we stop failing others." I nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." The next 6 months moved fast. Phoenix Wings grew from an idea scrawled on a notepad to a full-fledged program with its own hangar and advisory board. We had mentors from 4 branches, engineers from private firms, even a few seasoned pilots who'd once written people like us off, but had changed their minds. Dr. Webb joined our leadership team. He spoke at our first symposium, standing at a podium he once wouldn't have imagined himself behind. "We were trained to select the safest bets," he told the audience. But Harper Lane taught me that safe and right aren't always the same. It wasn't about second chances anymore. It was about better vision. The Air Force began referring overlooked candidates to us. Not just pilots, but techs, analysts, even medics who'd been boxed into roles too narrow for their skills. Phoenix didn't promise to fix everything, but it gave people a new lens to see their own worth. Meanwhile, life at Polaris went on. Jets still screamed across the Montana sky, drills still filled the calendar, and I kept my spot in Hangar 2. Some things don't change. I liked it that way. But one thing did shift, quietly. Captain Rivera stopped me after a briefing. He handed me a photo. F-07, grounded, sun glinting off her fuselage. I was standing beside her, one hand on the intake. "I had it framed," he said. "Put it up in the pilot's ready room." Below the photo was a simple plaque, the hand behind the wings. I swallowed hard. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said. "Because none of us fly without someone like you making it possible." No speech. No ceremony. Just acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. Phoenix Wings didn't just survive, it thrived. 2 years in, our alumni were leading teams, reworking safety protocols, and developing systems that cut pilot errors across multiple bases. What started as a side project became a model the Pentagon began studying. One day, I walked into the mess hall and saw something unexpected. A little girl, couldn't have been more than 10, was standing by our photo wall, staring up at the framed shot of F-07. Her mom, in civilian clothes, was close behind. When I passed, she turned to me, wide-eyed. "Are you the lady the airplane called for?" I smiled, caught off guard. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." She stepped closer. "My name's Eliza. I like airplanes." "Do you want to fly them?" I asked. "Or fix them?" She looked thoughtful. "Both. But mostly, I like listening to them." They sound different when something's wrong. I froze for just a second. That's how it started for me. That exact feeling. That connection. You hear more than most, I told her. That's special. I gave her mom a card, Phoenix Wings mentorship info, and told her to call if Eliza ever wanted to visit the base. When they left, Dalton, now a major, walked up beside me. She reminded me of someone, he said. She reminded me of everyone we nearly missed, I said quietly. And now we won't. I turned my coffee mug in my hands. Years of use had faded the words, but they were still there. Still trusted. Still flying. That had become our quiet anthem. And as the jets roared overhead, I smiled. I never sat in those cockpits. But make no mistake, I fly with them every day. After Eliza's visit, something shifted in me. Not just pride, but clarity. Phoenix wasn't just changing lives. It was changing the system. One of our earliest grads, Riya Patel, designed a predictive failure alert that caught a fuel pump issue before it went critical, saved a jet and 2 pilots. Another, Jamal Brooks, revamped the parts audit protocol, cutting hangar downtime in half. None of them fit the ideal candidate mold. But here they were, reshaping aviation from the ground up. We even had success stories from outside Polaris. Bases in Colorado and Florida adopted our model. One Navy admiral called it the most impactful culture shift in support roles I've seen in 20 years. I kept my focus local, though. Still wore the same boots. Still signed off diagnostics on the same jets. Then one morning, Colonel Wynn stopped me on the flight line. Lane, he said, we're naming the East Hangar after Phoenix Wings. Ceremony's next week. You'll be speaking. I blinked. You sure? He smiled. You redefined what leadership looks like. This place runs better because of you. When the day came, I stood on that small podium, looking out over the airfield. Pilots, techs, commanders, even Eliza and her mom were there. I didn't give a big speech. Just a few simple words. Not everyone gets to fly. But that doesn't mean we can't shape the sky. And when I looked over at Eliza, eyes wide, chin high, I saw the future. Not mine. Ours. 2 years after the emergency landing, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Hayes Webb in a panel meeting. This time, we weren't evaluating a candidate. We were rewriting how evaluation worked. He'd become one of Phoenix Wings' strongest advocates, helping overhaul the very frameworks that once sidelined people like me. He paused during the meeting and said, "You know, Lane, your rejection changed more than your own path. It changed mine." I nodded. Sometimes the wall you hit becomes the foundation you build on. Outside, the hangar named after our program gleamed in the afternoon sun. New recruits walked the floor, women and men from all walks, all labeled unconventional at some point. Now they were the heartbeat of Polaris. And me? I still worked on jets. I still did pre-flights. Still kept my hands dirty. But now I mentored too. Sat with young recruits who were where I had been. Quiet, unsure, overlooked. And every now and then, one of them would say it. They told me I wasn't what they were looking for. I always responded the same way. Then we'll show them what they missed. Because it wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about building something right. A few months after the hangar ceremony, Eliza returned, older by a year, but still curious-eyed and bold. She wore a Phoenix Wings cap we'd given her. Her mom said she hadn't taken it off since. We brought her to the observation deck during a formation drill. 6 jets tore through the sky, carving arcs like brushstrokes across blue. She leaned close and whispered, "Do you think one day they'll trust me too?" I looked at her, really looked, and saw that same flicker I'd carried for years. The need not just to do the work, but to be seen doing it. To matter. They already do, I said. And when the time comes, you'll fly in ways no checklist could ever predict. She beamed, and something quiet settled in my chest. Peace, maybe. Or purpose. Phoenix Wings kept growing. More bases adopted the program. More mentors signed on. And every now and then, I'd get a message, a tech in Guam, a trainee in Alaska, an old flight instructor from Texas, telling me how Phoenix had helped someone find their place. Not all of them flew jets, but they all found wings. And me? I stayed grounded by choice. Because not all heroes ride cockpits. Some of us build the safety they soar on. I keep the photo of F-16 on my wall, me and Rivera beside her, sunset in the background. But the item I treasure most sits on my desk, a coffee mug, chipped, the words almost gone. Still trusted. Still flying. It's not just a reminder. It's a promise that no one with passion and purpose should ever be written off.